Ojai, 28th August 1949. Questioner. Ideas do separate, but ideas also bring people together. Is this not the expression of love which makes communal life possible? Krishnamurti ji, I wonder when you ask such question, whether you realize that ideas, beliefs, opinions separate people, that ideologies break up, that ideas inevitably disrupt. Ideas do not hold people together, though you may try to bring together people belonging to differing and opposed ideologies. Ideas can never bring people together because ideas can always be opposed and destroyed through conflict. After all, ideas are images, sensations, words. Can words, sensation, thoughts bring people together? Or does one require quite a different thing to bring people together? One sees that hate, fear, and nationalism bring people together. Fear brings people together. A common hatred sometimes brings together people opposed to one another, as nationalism brings together people of opposing groups. Surely these are ideas. And is love an idea? Can you think about love? You're able to think about a person whom you love, or the group of people whom you love. But is that love? When there's thought about love, is that love? Is thought love? And surely only love can bring people together, not thought, not one group in opposition to another group. Where love is, there's no group, no class, no nationality. So one has to find out what we mean by love. We know that we mean by ideas, opinions, beliefs. So what do we mean by love? Is it a thing of the mind? Is it a thing of the mind when the things of the mind fill the heart? And with most of us, it is so. We have filled our heart with the things of the mind, which are opinions, ideas, sensations, beliefs, and around that, and in that we live and love. But is that love? Can we think about love? When you love, is thought functioning? Love and thought are not in opposition. Do not let us divide them as opposites. When one loves, is there a sense of separateness, of bringing people together, or disbanding them, pushing them away? Surely that state of love can be experienced only when the process of thought is not functioning, which does not mean that one must become crazy, unbalanced. On the contrary, it requires the higher form of thought to go beyond. So love is not a thing of the mind. It is only when the mind is really quiet, when it is no longer expecting, asking, demanding, seeking, possessing, being jealous, fearful, anxious, when the mind is really silent, only then there is a possibility of love. When the mind is no longer projecting itself, pursuing its particular sensations, demands, urges, hidden fears, no longer seeking self fulfillment or being held in bondage to belief, only then there is a possibility of love. But most of us think love can go with jealousy, with ambition, with the pursuit of personal desires and ambitions. Surely, when these things exist, love is not. So we must concerned not with love, which comes into being spontaneously without our particularly seeking it, but we must be concerned with the things that are hindering love, with the things of the mind which project themselves and create a barrier. And that is why it is important, before we can know what love is, to know what is the process of the mind, which is the seat of the self. And that is why it is important to go ever more deeply into the question of self knowledge. Not merely say, I must love, or love brings people together, or ideas disrupt, which would be a mere repetition of what you have heard, therefore utterly useless. Words entangle, but if one can understand the whole significance of the ways of one's thought, the ways of our desires, and that pursuits and ambitions, then there is a possibility of having and understanding that which is love. but that requires an extraordinary understanding of oneself. When there is self abnegation, when there is self forgetfulness, not intentionally but spontaneously, a self forgetfulness, self denial, that is not the outcome of practices or disciplines that merely limits, then there's a possibility of love. That self denial comes into being when the whole process of the self is understood, consciously as well as unconsciously, in the waking hours as well as in dreaming. Then the total process of the mind is understood as it is actually taking place in relationship, in every incident, in every response, to every challenge that one has. In understanding that and therefore freeing the mind from its own self correcting, self limiting process, there's a possibility of love. Love is not sentiment, not romanticism, not dependent on something. That state is extremely arduous and is difficult to understand or to be in because our minds are always interfering, limiting, encroaching upon its functioning. Therefore, it is unimportant. Therefore, it is important to understand first the mind and its ways. Otherwise, we shall be caught in illusions, caught in words and sensations that have very little significance. For most people, ideas merely act as a refuge, as an escape. Ideas which have become beliefs naturally prevent complete living, complete action, right thinking. It is possible to think rightly, to live freely and intelligently, only when there is ever deeper and wider self knowledge. Mumbai, 12 March 1950. Questioner: we know sex as inescapable physical and psychological necessity, and seems to be a root cause of chaos in the personal life of our generation. It is a horror to young women who are victims of men's lust, suppression, and indulgence and are equally ineffective. How can we deal with this problem? Krishnamurti ji, why is it that whatever we touch we turn into a problem? We've made God a problem. We've made love a problem. We made relationship, living a problem. And we have made sex a problem. Why? Why is everything we do a problem, a horror? Why are we suffering? Why has sex become a problem? Why do we submit to living with problems? Why do we not die to our problems instead of carrying them day after day, year after year? Surely sex is a relevant question, but there is a primary question. Why do we make life into a problem? Working, sex, earning money, thinking, feeling, experiencing. You know, the whole business of living. Why is it a problem? Is it not essentially because we always think from a particular point of view, from a fixed point of view? We're always thinking from a center towards a periphery, but the periphery is the center for most of us. And so anything we touch is superficial. But life is not superficial. It demands living completely. And because we are living only superficially, we know only superficial reaction. Whatever we do on the periphery must inevitably create a problem. And that is our life. We live in superficial and we are content to live there with all the problems of the superficial. So problems exist as long as we live in the superficial on the periphery. The periphery being with me and its sensations. So problems exist as long as we live the superficial on the periphery being the me and its sensations, which can be externalized or made subjective, which can be identified with the universe, with the country, or with something made up by the mind. So, as long as we live within the field of the mind, there must be complications, there must be problems, and that is all we know. Mind is sensation. Mind is the result of accumulated sensations and reactions, and anything it touches is bound to create misery, confusion, and endless problem. The mind is the real cause of our problems. The mind that is working mechanically, night and day, consciously and unconsciously. The mind is most superficial thing and we have spent generations. We spend our whole lives cultivating the mind, making it more and more clever, more and more subtle, more and more cunning, more and more dishonest and crooked, all of which is apparent in every activity of our life. The very nature of our mind is to be dishonest, crooked, incapable of facing facts, and that is the thing that creates problem. That is the thing which is the problem itself. Now, what do we mean by the problem of sex? Is it the act or is it the thought about the act? Surely it is not the act. The sexual act is not a problem to you, any more than eating is a problem to you. But if you think about eating all day long because you have nothing else to think about, it becomes a problem to you. So is the sexual act the problem or is it the thought about the act? Why do you think about it? Why do you build it up? The cinemas, the magazines, the stories, the way people dress, everything is building up your thought of sex. Why does the mind build it up? Why does the mind think about sex at all? Why has it become a central issue in your life? When there are so many things calling, demanding your attention, you give complete attention to the thought of sex. Why is your mind so occupied with it? Because that is the way of ultimate escape. It is way of complete self-forgetfulness. For the time being, at least for that moment, you can forget yourself. And there's no other way of forgetting yourself. Everything else you do in life give emphasis to the me, to the self. Your business, your religion, your gods, your leaders, your political and economic actions, your escapes, your social activities, your joining one party and rejecting another, all that is emphasizing and giving strength to the me. That is, there's only one act in which there's no emphasis on the me, so it becomes a problem. When there's only one thing in your life, that is an avenue to ultimate escape, to complete forgetfulness of yourself. If only for a few seconds you cling to it because that is the only moment you're happy, every other issue you touch becomes a nightmare, a source of suffering and pain. So you cling to the one thing that gives complete self forgetfulness, which you call happiness. But when you cling to it, it too becomes a nightmare, because then you want to be free from it. You do not want to be a slave to it. So you invent again from the mind the idea of chastity, of celibacy, and you try to celebrate, to be chaste, through suppression, denial meditation, through all kinds of religious practices, and all of which are operations of the mind to cut itself off from the fact. This again gives particular emphasis to the me who's trying to become something. So again you're caught in trivial, in trouble, in effort, in pain. So sex becomes an extraordinarily difficult and complex problem as long as you do not understand the mind, which thinks about the problem. The act itself can never be a problem, but the thought about the act creates a problem. You safeguard the act, you live loosely or indulge yourself in marriage. Surely the problem can be solved only when you understand the whole process and structure of the me and the mine, my wife, my husband, my child, my property, my car, my achievements, my success, and until you understand and resolve all that, sex as a problem will remain. As long as you're ambitious, politically, religiously, or in any way, as long as you're emphasizing the self, the thinker, the experiencer, by feeding it on ambition, whether in the name of yourself as an individual or in the name of the country, of the party, or of any idea which you call religion, as long as there is the activity of self expansion, you will have a sexual problem. Surely you are creating, feeding, spending yourself on the one hand, and on the other hand, you're trying to forget yourself, to lose yourself, if only for a moment. How can the two exist together? So your life is a contradiction, emphasis on the me and forgetting the me. Sex is not a problem. The problem is the contradiction in your life, and the contradiction cannot be bridged over by the mind, because the mind itself is a contradiction. The contradiction can be understood only when you understand fully the whole process of your daily existence. Going to the cinemas, reading books which stimulate thought, magazines with their half naked pictures, your way of looking at others, the surreptitious eyes that catch you, all these things are encouraging the mind through devious ways to emphasize the self and at the same time try to be kind, loving, tender. The two cannot go together. The man who is ambitious, spiritually or otherwise, can never be without a problem, because problem cease only when the self is forgotten, when the me is non existent, and that state of the non existence of the self is not an act of will. It is not a mere reaction. Sex becomes a reaction, and when the mind tries to solve the problem, it only makes the problem more confused, more troublesome, more painful. So the act is not the problem, but the mind is the problem. The mind that says it must be chaste. Chastity is not of the mind. The mind can only suppress its own activities and be cultivated. The man who is cultivating humility is surely not a humble man. He may call his pride humility, but he is a proud man, and that is why he seeks to become humble. Pride can never become humble, and chastity is not a thing of the mind. You cannot become chaste. You will know chastity only when there is love, and love is not of the mind, nor a thing of the mind. So the problem of sex, which tortures so many people all over the world, cannot be resolved until the mind is understood. So the problem of sex, which tortures so many people all over the world, cannot be resolved until the mind is understood. We cannot put an end to thinking, but thought comes to an end. When the thinker ceases, and the thinker ceases only when there is an understanding of the whole process, fear comes into being when there is a division between the thinker and his thought. When there is no thinker, then only there is no conflict in thought. What is implicit needs no effort to understand. The thinker comes into being through thought. Then the thinker exerts himself to shape, to control his thoughts, or to put an end to them. The thinker is a fictitious entity, an illusion of the mind. When there is a realization of thought as a fact, then there is no need to think about the fact. If there is simple, choiceless awareness, then that which is implicit in the fact begins to reveal itself. Therefore, thought as fact ends. Then you will see that the problems which are eating at our hearts and minds, the problems of our social structure, can be resolved. Then sex is no longer a problem. It has its proper place. It is neither an impure thing nor a pure thing. Then sex is no longer a problem. It has its proper place. It is neither an impure thing nor a pure thing. Sex has its place, but when the mind gives it the predominant place, then it becomes a problem. The mind gives sex a predominant place because it cannot live without some happiness, and so sex becomes a problem. But when the mind understands its whole process and so comes to an end, that is when the thinking ceases. That then there is a creation, and it is that creation which makes us happy. To be in that state of creation is bliss, because it is self forgetfulness in which there is no reaction as from the self. This is not an abstract answer to the daily problem of sex. It is only the answer. The mind denies love, and without love there is no chastity. It is because there is no love that you make sex into a problem. Questioner. Love as we know and experience it, is a fusion between two people or between the members of a group. It is exclusive, and it there's both pain and joy. When you say love is the only solvent of life's problems, you're giving a connotation to the word which we have hardly experienced. Can a common man like me ever know love in your sense? Krishnamurti ji, everybody can know love, but you can know it only when you are capable of looking at facts very clearly, without resistance, without justification, without explaining them away. Just look at things closely, observe them very clearly and minutely. Now, what is the thing that we call love? The questioner says that it is exclusive and that in it we know pain and joy. Is love exclusive? We shall find out when we examine what we call love, what the so called common man calls love. There's no common man, there's only man, which is you and I. The common man is a fictitious entity invented by the politicians. There's only man, which is you and I, who are in sorrow, in pain, in anxiety, and fear. Now, what is our life? To find out what love is, let us begin with what we know. What is our love? In the midst of pain and pleasure, we know it is exclusive, personal. My wife, my children, my country, my God. We know it as a flame in the midst of smoke. We know it through jealousy. We know it through domination. We know it through possession. We know it through loss and when the other is gone. So we know love as sensation, do we not? When we say we love, we know jealousy, we know fear, we know anxiety. When you say you love someone, all that is implied envy, the desire to possess, the desire to own, to dominate, the fear of loss, and so on. All this we call love, and we do not know love without fear, without envy, without possession. We merely verbalize that state of love, which is without fear. We call it impersonal, pure, divine, or God knows what else. But the fact is that we are jealous. We are dominating, possessive. We shall know that state of love only when a jealousy, envy, possessiveness, dominations comes to an end. And as long we possess, we shall never love. Envy, possession, hatred, the desire to dominate the person or the thing called mine, the desire to possess and to be possessed. And that is a process of thought, isn't it? Is love a process of thought? Is love a thing of the mind? Actually, for most of us, it is. Do not say it isn't. It is nonsense to say that. Do not deny the fact that your love is a thing of the mind. Surely it is, otherwise, you would not possess it. You would not dominate. You would not say, it is mine. Since you do say it, your love is a thing of the mind. So, love, for you, is a process of thought. You can think about the person from whom you love, but is thinking about the person whom you love love? When do you think about the person whom you love? You think about her when she's gone, when she's away, when she has left you. But when she no longer disturbs you, when you can say she's mine, then you do not have to think about her. You do not have to think about your furniture. It's a part of you, which is a process of identification, so as not to be disturbed, to avoid trouble, anxiety, sorrow. So you miss the person whom you say you love only when you are disturbed, when you are in suffering. And as long as you possess that person, you do not have to think about that person. Because in possession, there is no disturbance. But when the possession is disturbed, you begin to think. And then you say, I love that person. So your love is merely a reaction of the mind, isn't it? Which means Your love is merely a sensation, and sensation is surely not love. Do you think about the person when you are close, when you possess, hold, dominate, control, when you can say she's mine or he is mine? There's no problem. As long as you're certain in your possession, there's no problem. In society, everything you have built around you helps you to possess so as not to be disturbed, so as not to think about it. Thinking comes when you're disturbed, and you're bound to be disturbed as long as you're thinking is what you call love. Surely love is not a thing of the mind. It is because the things of the mind have filled our hearts that we have no love. The things of the mind are jealousy, envy, ambition, the desire to be somebody, to achieve success. These things of the mind fill your heart, and then you say you love. But how can you love when you have all the confusing elements in you? When there's smoke, how can there be a pure flame? Love is not a thing of the mind, and love is the only solution to our problems. Love is not of the mind, and the man who has accumulated money or knowledge can never know love, because he lives with the things of the mind. His activities are of the mind, and whatever he touches, he makes into a problem, confusion, a misery. So, what we call our love is a thing of the mind. Look at yourself, and you will see what I'm saying is obviously true. Otherwise, our lives, our marriages, our relationships would be entirely different. We would have a new society. We bind ourselves to another not through fusion, but through contract, which is called love, marriage. Love does not fuse, adjust. It is neither personal nor impersonal. It is a state of being. The man who desires to fuse with something greater, to unite himself with another, is avoiding misery, confusion. But the mind is still in separation, which is disintegration. Love knows neither fusion nor diffusion. It is neither personal nor impersonal. It's a state of being where the mind cannot find. It can describe it, give it a term, a name, but the word, the description is not love. It is only when the mind is quiet that it shall know love, and that state of quietness is not a thing to be cultivated. Cultivation is still the action of the mind. Discipline is still a product of the mind, and the mind that is disciplined, controlled, subjugated, a mind that is resisting, explaining, cannot know love. You may read, you may listen to what is being said about love, but that is not love. Only when you put away the things of the mind, only when your heart is empty of the things of the mind, is there love. Then you will know what is to love without separation, without distance, without time, without fear, and that is not reserved to the few. Love knows no hierarchy, there is only love. There are the many and the one, and exclusiveness only when you do not love. When you do love, there is neither the you nor the me. In that state, there is only a flame without a smoke. New York, 18th June 1950. Questioner: how am I to get rid of fear, which influences all my activities? Krishnamurti ji: this is a very complex question, requiring close attention, and if we do not follow and explore it fully, in the sense of experiencing each step as we go along, we will not be able, at the end of it, to be free of fear. What do we mean by fear? Fear of what? There are various types of fear, and we need not analyze every type. But we can see that fear comes into being when our comprehension of relationship is not complete. Relationship is not only between people, but between ourselves and nature, between ourselves and property, between ourselves and ideas, and as long as that relationship is not fully understood, there must be fear. Life is relationship. To be is to be related, and without relationship, there's no life. Nothing can exist in isolation, and as long as the mind is seeking isolation, there must be fear. So, fear is not an abstraction, it exists only in relation to something. Now, the question is how to be rid of fear. First of all, anything that is overcome has to be conquered again and again. No problem can be finally overcome, conquered. It can be understood but not conquered. They are two completely different processes, and the conquering process leads to further confusion, further fear. To resist, to dominate, to do better with a problem, or to build a defense against it is only to create further conflict. Whereas if we can understand fear, go into it fully, step by step, explore the whole content of it, then fear will never return in any form. And that is what I hope we can do now. As I said, fear is not an abstraction. It exists only in relationship. Now, what do we mean by fear? Ultimately, we are afraid of not being, of not becoming. Not when there is a fear of not being, of not advancing, or fear of the unknown, of death, can the fear be overcome by determination, by a conclusion, by any choice? Obviously not. Mere suppression, sublimation, or substitution creates further resistance. Does it not? So fear can never be overcome through any form of discipline, through any form of resistance, nor can there be freedom from fear through the search for an answer, or through mere intellectual or verbal explanation. Now, what are we afraid of? Are we afraid of a fact? Of an idea about the fact? Please see this point. Are we afraid of the thing as it is, or are we afraid of what we think it is? Take death, for example. Are we afraid of the fact of death or the idea of death? The fact is one thing, and the idea about the fact is another. Am I afraid of the word death or of the fact itself? Because I'm afraid of the word or the idea, I never understand the fact. I never look at the fact. I'm never in direct relation with the fact. It is only when I am in complete communion with the fact that there is no fear. But if I am not in communion with the fact, then there is fear. There is no communion with the fact as long as I have an idea, an opinion, a theory about the fact. So I have to be very clear whether I'm afraid of the word, the idea, or of the fact. If I am face to face with the fact, there's nothing to understand about it. The fact is there, and I can deal with it. But if I'm afraid of the word, then I must understand the word, go into the whole process of what the word applies. For example, one is afraid of loneliness, afraid of the ache, the pain of loneliness. Surely that fear exists because one has never really looked at loneliness. One has never been in complete communion with it. The moment one is completely open the fact of loneliness, one can understand what it is. But one has an idea, an opinion about it, based on previous knowledge. And it is this idea, opinion, this previous knowledge about the fact that creates fear. So fear is obviously the outcome of naming, of terming, of projecting a symbol to represent the fact. That is, fear is not independent of the word. I have a reaction, say, to loneliness. That is, I say I'm afraid of being nothing. Am I afraid of the fact itself? Or is that fear awakened? Because I have previous knowledge of the fact. Knowledge being the word, the symbol, the image. How can there be a fear of fact? When I'm face to face with a fact, in direct communion with it, I can look at it, observe it. Therefore, there is no fear of the fact. What causes fear is my apprehension about the fact. But the fact might be or do. So it is my opinion, my idea, my experience, my knowledge about the fact that creates fear. As long as there is a verbalization of the fact, giving the fact a name, and therefore identifying, not condemning it, as long as thought is judging the fact as an observer, there must be fear. Thought is a product of the past. It can only exist through verbalization, through symbols, through images, and as long as thought is regarding or translating the fact, there must be fear. So it is the mind that creates fear, the mind being the process of thinking. Thinking is verbalization. You cannot think without words, without symbols, images. These images, which are the prejudice, the previous knowledge, apprehension of the mind, are projected upon the fact, and out of that fact there arises a fear. There's freedom from fear only when the mind is capable of looking at the fact without translating it, without giving it a name, a label. This is quite difficult because feelings, the reactions, the anxieties that we have are properly identified by the mind and given a word. The feeling of jealousy is identified by that word. I, is it possible not to identify a feeling, to look at the feeling without naming it? It is the naming of the feeling that gives it a continuity, that gives it strength. The moment you give a name to that which you call fear, you strengthen it. But if you can look at the feeling without terming it, you will see that it withers away. Therefore, if one will be completely free of fear, it is essential to understand this whole process of terming, of projecting symbols, images, giving names to facts. That is, there can be freedom from fear only when there is self knowledge. Self knowledge is the beginning of wisdom, which is the ending of fear. Questioner: how can I permanently get rid of sexual desire? Krishnamurti ji: why do we want to get permanently rid of a desire? You call it sexual, somebody else calls it attachment, fear, and so on. Why do we want to get rid of any desire permanently? Because that particular desire is disturbing to us. We don't want to be disturbed. And that is our whole process of thinking, isn't it? We want to be self enclosed without any disturbance. That is, we want to be isolated. But nothing can live in isolation. In his search for God, the so called religious person is really seeking complete isolation, in which he will never be disturbed. But such a person is not really religious. The truly religious are those who understand a relationship completely, fully, and therefore have no problem, no conflict. Not that they are not disturbed, but because they are not seeking certainty. They understand disturbance, and therefore there is no self enclosing process created by the desire for security. Now, this question requires a great deal of understanding because we are dealing with sensation, which is thought. To most people, sex has become an extraordinarily important problem. People being uncreative, afraid, enclosed, cut off in all the other directions. Sex is the only thing through which they can find a release. The one act which is self is momentarily absent. In that brief state of abnegation, when the self, the me, with all its troubles, confusions, and worries, is absent, there is great happiness. Through self forgetfulness, there is sense of quietness, a release, and because we are uncreative, religiously, economically, and in every other direction, sex becomes an overwhelmingly important problem. In daily life, we are mere gramophone records, repeating phrases that we have learned religiously. We are autonomous mechanically following the priest. Economically and socially, we are bound, strangled by environmental influences. Is there release for us in any of that? Obviously not. And where there is no release, there must be frustration. That is why the sexual act, in which there is a release, has become such a vital problem for most of us, and society encourages and stimulates it through advertisements, magazines, the cinema, and all the rest of it. As long as the mind, which is the result, the focal point of sensation, regards sex as a means of its release, sex must be a problem, and that problem will continue as long as we are incapable of being creative, comprehensively, totally, and not merely in one particular direction. Creativeness has nothing to do with sensation. Sex is of the mind, and creation is not of the mind. Creation is never a product of the mind, a product of thought, and in that sense, sex, which is a sensation, can never be creative. It may produce babies, but that is obviously not creativeness. As long as we depend for release on sensation, on stimulation in any form, there must be frustration, because the mind becomes incapable of realizing what creativeness is. This problem cannot be resolved by any discipline, by any taboos, by any social edicts or sanctions. It can be resolved only when we understand the whole process of the mind, because it is a mind that is sexual. It is the mind's images, fancies, pictures that stimulate it to be sexual, and the mind is the release of sensation. It can only become more and more sensuous. Such a mind can never be creative because creation is not sensation. It is only when the mind does not seek stimuli in any form, whether outward or inward, that it can be completely quiet, free, and only in that freedom is there a creation. We have made sex into something ugly because it is only private sensation that we have. All other sensations are public, open. But as long as we use sensation in any form as a means of release, it will only increase the problems, the confusion, the trouble. Because release can never come into being through seeking a result. The questioner wants to end sexual desire permanently because he has an idea that when he will be in a state in which all disturbances have disappeared, that is why he is seeking it, striving towards it. The very striving towards that state is preventing him from being free to understand the process of the mind. As long as the mind is merely seeking a permanent state in which it will have no disturbance of any kind, it is closed, and therefore it can never be creative. It is only when the mind is free of the desire to become something, to achieve a result, and hence free of fear, that it can be utterly quiet. Only then is there a possibility of that creativeness which is reality.